The idea with being with strong reactions to sensation, um, displaying elements of both what's called craving, which is like holding on to things that feel good or pleasant, but also aversion, like pushing away or not wanting things that feel hard or challenging, and this being the cause of what was said to be of all suffering, this craving or aversion. And instead, the idea being with these practices that we practice awareness, so being aware of these things, but also equanimity, meaning that things can feel like neither pleasant or unpleasant. We're not pushing away or holding on. Instead, we're just being with what is. But I can't put into words how much that challenges you, and how that causes, through the physical pain that you feel from sitting for 10 hours a day and not moving, to bring up all of the emotional and the mental crap and stuff that you've been just holding on to beneath the surface from a lifetime of experience. Situations, experiences, relationships, they were all remet for me for sure. And it was bloody hard. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. But similar exercises that I'd done in the past, I'd felt those feelings, but never that many times in a row for that long. There was really nowhere to hide. But I don't know whether it was the Taurus and that stubborn nature in me. I didn't move. I did not move. And then day 6 came, the hardest of all the days. And as I sat for the final time that day, the pain was excruciating. I'd had this one pain in my right glute that had been there from the very beginning, from the very first practice. And towards the end, every time it would be screaming at me, but this time was just too much. I felt like I was finally at that point of defeat. And I allowed myself 60 breaths. This is how crazy you go. 60 breaths to say, okay, I'll be with it. And if after that the voice doesn't come on, I'll move. And halfway through that, the strangest thing happened. The sensation, which was so sharp and felt like literally knives at my right glute, that had been the cause of all my pain from the very beginning, it changed. It went to like this freezing cold sensation, something that I'd never experienced before. It literally felt like my left or right butt cheek was in a freezer, and it went kind of tingly. And then with that, it meant I could sit with it. But not only that, all of the other really subtle sensations started coming to the fore. And then after breathing with it, the voice then came back on, and it was over. I went to bed and I was pretty dumbfounded. I didn't really know what had happened or how something like that, which was so intense, could just change and be so able to sit with it all of a sudden. And then I guess instead of trying to dissect it, I was exhausted and I fell straight asleep, and I had literally the best sleep I'd had all week. And the next morning, the strangest thing happened. These continued weird happenings kept going. The practices were just firstly so much more easeful, and then after breakfast, no rumination. So for those of you who don't know, rumination is this, it's almost like a reflux. So every time that you eat, your food basically comes back up to be rechewed, which sounds, I know, quite gross and disgusting as you think about it, and something that I held a lot of shame and still do about. It was not nice to do around people, and it was kind of something that I did in secret, but I couldn't help it. I had gone to every therapist, every practitioner available, doctor. No one could get to the bottom of why, and any of the treatments, which is usually kind of diaphragmatic breathing, they hadn't helped. But then same happened after lunch and tea. In fact, believe it or not, it's been well over 8 days now and it hasn't come back. Now, that doesn't mean my mental battle stopped, as I found myself questioning everything. The process, the routines, my resilience, me as a person, literally everything that I could question, I started questioning. I'd taken deciding that the practice in the hall, every time that it was given as an option, was depleting me. So when the option was given that I would start practicing in my room. Now, I took that as an option from that day onwards, but then, of course, I battled for days with myself. Those perfectionist tendencies came up of, why can't you just do it? You know, why can't you sit like other people and, you know, they're stronger, you're not good enough, you're not, you know, as good as they are, etc., etc., etc. My realization here that I've had a lifetime of pushing myself beyond my limits and having to be perfect, which is self-imposed, not by anyone else, without fault, or, you know, to be indestructible. And that rigidity has only done me harm. And softening and finding a little bit more compassion or ease towards myself was actually the learning that I realized I needed most. So I felt it was so much more nurturing. Now, throughout the process, each evening, as I mentioned, there's also a discourse, which was a video played from the head of the practice from 30 years ago. So it was actually 1991, it comes up at the start, which was helpful because it would give themes or, you know, things to think about, whether in your practice, but also around your life, which I found, you know, really kept me going. But also crazy how relevant they still were 30 years on. And one thing that I really found was in between the practices, but also in how I was meeting myself throughout the time, I really got this felt sense of bulldozing, and this word just kept coming, bulldozing, through life. That everything for me had been so fast, pushing through beyond limits, you know, go, 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 doing more and more and more, losing sight of what's important. And searching everywhere outside myself to fill a hole that I felt I had. And the realization that I had on the 8th morning was that the hole, that wasn't a physical thing. It wasn't something that I could fill with doing more work or messaging more people or calling people or, you know, doing more for everyone else. It was actually a result of the emptiness that I felt, and I've long felt for a very long time, which, as I said, wasn't from anything external, but rather my inability to just accept and love myself for the person that I am. And that morning, I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time, I didn't see my imperfections anymore. I didn't see my flaws. My skin was glowing. There was a depth in my eyes that were as deep as the universe. And I felt at home finally in my own skin. I felt like I was finally able to befriend the kind, the caring, the compassionate, and the beautiful person that I am. And I sat on my floor and I cried like I am now. And I smiled. I smiled from finally feeling like I was okay. And I didn't need anyone else to tell me that. They told me that all my life, but I needed to feel it. And I was a little tired from such revelations. So I went to lie down for a few minutes. And then before lunch, which was only a few minutes later, I heard loud footsteps outside my door. And I heard a man's voice, which was crazy because this is the female area. And he was talking to the female manager. And I realized it was our teacher. And I hadn't heard him talk anything apart from the set words that he was due to say. So that felt strange. I couldn't really make out what he was saying, but I just heard that he said, we need to gather them. And then 10 minutes before lunch, which was the bell, which would normally go, the bell went, which was also weird because, as I said, we had a very rigid routine and structure. So I knew something was up. And walking outside, I realized that everyone was heading up in the opposite direction to lunch, and people started making eye contact and going, mm-mm. And I was like, okay, this is really weird, and they've just broken the rules, but this is weird. So I followed, and I took my usual spot in the hall where we were designated the whole time, and everyone was sitting, so I just followed suit. And everyone's eyes were closed, which was weird. I thought we were just doing another practice, or this was a challenge of some sort. But then a few minutes passed, and all of a sudden my teacher spoke, and he said that the whole of Victoria was heading into lockdown as of midnight that night, and we had 2 hours basically to get home, and that would be ending silence immediately. We were to have lunch, get cleaning, and off we go. And it's usually the process would really continue and end in a way that was really nurturing and really feel like you were set and on your way to go forth into the real world and feel, you know, baby steps. But this was kind of like a slap across the face, and then the floor was open to questions. So people's hands were obviously going crazy, and with that, all of a sudden, that bubble of safety was just gone and lost into the chaos. For me, I was really overcome with emotion that day. Obviously, I'd had a big morning, and I started shaking a little. I was fighting back tears. There was so much going on. There was so many emotions. I had my time left imagined so vividly. You know, my outfits were left out. I'd practiced going home, walking into my house many times, but knew that it was going to be different. But also that was really the aim of the practice, right? That sense of impermanence. And the next 2 hours then became the strangest mix of emotions: sadness and disappointment for not finishing the 10 days, anger, frustration at the lockdown, joy at being able to see my husband that evening, and then meeting and chatting briefly to all those that we'd shared the experience with. On one hand felt like strangers, but on the other felt like I'd known them all my life and had conversations of real depth in the car park, which was interesting, as I then got in my car just like that and was with my 2 roomies who I'd spent time with. My car would be interesting. I spied through a hole on my walk one day, so I used to keep an eye on it and just say I'll be back someday, and just like that I was going home. And it felt like I was trying to learn how to drive again. It was lashing out of rain, and also relearning how to human. I smiled, I cried, I continued to feel. And then when I received my valuables, I called my husband and said, yeah, I'm coming, and reassured I was safe, and managed to hide through the tears. But he had reassured me and told me he'd spoken to my good friend and mentor who told him exactly how I would feel and what to do. So that was pretty great, and just allowed me to take my time. When I found myself alone in the car again, I drove in silence to the sea, and I sat there for a few minutes, and just as the rain pelted and the waves crashed, I could just see the sea itself, but also my emotions just coming and going and coming and going. And I sat there sobbing, and I just let it all go. It wasn't sad, it was just everything, just a release, turning to head home again. And then just driving towards home, the most beautiful thing happened. The clouds parted, and the most incredible rainbow appeared, just like my very first day. And I remembered that all was unfolding just as it should. And so integration was difficult. A sensitive soul I was feeling in a big way. Turning my phone wasn't a great idea, so I decided to flight mode for a few more days. And on reflection, I feel the main takeaways for me were to stop bulldozing through life, to reprioritize, to move slow, to remember I'm human and that appreciating life is what I was born for, to run my own race, to walk my own path, to stop comparing and worrying what others think. And also that I've so many incredible people in my life, to make time for them and be present rather than ticking a box, and tell them how much they mean to me. And most importantly, to remember there's no hole that needs to be filled. Just a beautiful human who only asks to be loved just as she is. Nothing added, nothing taken away. Here's to a path of remembering.